Have you ever noticed something about people who grew up in the 1990s? Something you couldn't quite name? There is a quality in how they hold a conversation. They listen without rushing to respond. They do not fill every silence. They are present without performing presence steady in a way that feels unusual now, almost calibrated, as though they're not trying to prove they're there but simply are. At first, it's easy to explain this away. Maybe introversion. Maybe they're just not that interested in online culture. But that explanation doesn't quite hold, because this isn't about temperament. This is about timing. What you're sensing isn't detachment. It is regulation, a nervous system that learned how to be with itself before it learned how to broadcast itself. And once you understand what the 1990s actually did to the brains of the people who grew up inside them, that quality stops being mysterious. It becomes the most predictable outcome imaginable. People born in the 1990s occupy a psychological position no generation before or after fully understands. Their early years were shaped by a world that moved slowly enough to feel solid. Communication required intention. Connection required effort. Time had weight. Then, almost without warning, the ground shifted. Technology accelerated. This generation had to adapt while their sense of self was still forming. A bridge does not belong fully to either side. It exists to connect what came before with what came after. And living in that position is psychologically demanding in ways that are rarely named. They are fluent in digital spaces one moment, longing for a kind of depth technology struggles to replicate the next. They understand convenience, but they remember cost. They were never meant to choose a side. They were shaped to carry both. The first thing the 1990s did to the brain sounds almost too simple. It taught it to stay. Childhood unfolded without a record button. Moments did not come with a pause function. Joy existed fully in the present because there was no expectation that it would be captured, shared, or validated afterward. And this shaped something subtle but powerful in the nervous system. When moments cannot be saved, the mind learns to stay. Attention settles naturally instead of splitting between the moment and its potential representation. Experiences feel complete because no part of the brain is holding back, calculating how this will look later. Psychologists describe this as being internally anchored a nervous system that does not need to perform awareness in order to feel real, that does not require proof to trust that an experience matters. Later, when technology introduced endless documentation, this generation already carried a different baseline. They could use the tools, but their sense of presence did not depend on them. Moments did not need witnesses. That early environment trained a quiet kind of attention, one that stays with what is happening, instead of splitting itself between the moment and its potential representation. The second thing the 1990s did was teach the brain to regulate itself through the unlikely teacher of boredom. There was no algorithm stepping in the moment stimulation dropped. When boredom appeared, it stayed. And that forced a choice: remain uncomfortable or create something from the empty space. Boredom became the doorway to interactivity, daydreaming, inventing, learning to occupy your own mind without external input. Over time, this trained something deeper than creativity. It trained emotional self-regulation. When there is nothing to distract you, the nervous system learns that discomfort rises, peaks, and fades without needing immediate relief. That skill becomes the foundation for being alone without panic, for waiting without agitation, for feeling restless without needing to numb it. Boredom was a teacher. It showed them that the inner life could be rich enough to hold attention on its own. Silence does not signal emptiness. It signals possibility. When the outside world goes still, the inside world does not disappear. It wakes up. The third imprint was perhaps the most structurally important: a different relationship with time. Waiting was built into daily life not as a lesson, but as a condition. You waited for movies at the video store. You saved money for weeks to buy a single album. Desire did not lead directly to fulfillment. Time sat in between. Because delayed gratification is not just about patience, it is about trust. Trust that what you want can exist without being immediately satisfied. Trust that anticipation does not destroy. Desire, it deepens it. When rewards arrive after effort and time, the brain learns that waiting is survivable and meaningful. In relationships, this shows up as emotional patience, the ability to allow bonds to form gradually, without forcing intensity before it has grown naturally. A culture built around immediacy trains the nervous system to equate delay with loss to read, waiting as rejection. For those shaped differently, waiting never meant absence. It meant process. Not everything unfolds on demand. Some things ripen. If any part of this is landing for you, take a moment to drop a like. It helps more people find conversations like this. And if you enjoy exploring the deeper psychology of how we're shaped, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. The fourth thing the 1990s did was create a specific kind of psychological duality, a bilingualism that looks, from the outside, simply like quietness. This generation learned silence before they learned constant stimulation. Silence was not something to fix. You could share a room without speaking and still feel connected. That early experience trained the nervous system to stay regulated without continuous input. Then they became fluent in digital communication, as well fluent in the language of message, timing, tone, and platform. They are not technologically behind, they are bilingual. This duality means they can switch between presence and performance, depth and speed, silence and responsiveness, and they know the difference in a way that people who grew up fully inside digital life often don't. Their quiet carries intention. They do not confuse constant communication with closeness. Connection does not disappear when words pause. It simply changes form. For many people now, silence triggers anxiety it reads as rejection. For those shaped by the 1990s, silence is neutral. Sometimes it is even grounding. But adaptation has a cost, and this is the part that almost never gets named. When you grow up learning to handle things on your own, you also learn to minimize your needs. Skilled at self-regulation, but less practiced at asking for help. You absorb discomfort quietly instead of signaling it outward. Resilience becomes visible. Strain remains hidden. People from this generation are routinely mistaken for being emotionally self-sufficient, calm, low maintenance, unbothered. But that perception overlooks how much they carry internally. There is also the cost of living between worlds. Being fluent in two psychological environments can mean fully belonging to neither. They remember depth, but operate in systems that reward speed. This creates a quiet sense of displacement that is difficult to explain. The hidden cost of adaptability is that it delays recognition. Others see competence and assume ease. But inside, there is often fatigue, the specific fatigue of someone who has been recalibrating, continuously, for years. And beneath all of this lives something that many people from this generation recognize immediately but struggle to articulate. They often feel older than they are, not because they grew up too fast, because they witnessed something most generations do not. They watched a world disappear while they were still learning how to belong in it. They remember when life moved at a human pace, when privacy was not a setting you managed but a default you lived inside. And then, within a single lifetime, those rules dissolved. Speed replaced rhythm. Exposure replaced privacy. When you carry memory of a world that no longer exists, you develop a form of emotional gravity, not sadness exactly, more like weight. Something meaningful was lost, even if something useful was gained. This produces maturity without cynicism, awareness without bitterness. They appear grounded but tired, thoughtful but reserved. Not disillusioned, simply aware of how fragile systems can be, because they have seen one vanish. Feeling older than your age is not a flaw. It is the mark of having lived through transition with your eyes open. This is not a story about one generation being better than another. It is a story about timing and about what timing leaves behind. What the 1990s did to the brains that formed inside them was this. It built a nervous system calibrated for depth before speed arrived, for presence before performance was required, for patience before immediacy became the expectation. It taught them that boredom is survivable, that silence is inhabitable, that not everything needs an audience to be real. And then, it handed them a world operating on entirely different assumptions. They live in it fluently, but they carry a rhythm that formed somewhere else. And it still serves them in how they listen, in how they wait, in how they stay. Not despite where they came from. Because of it,